In the spring of 1925, a man in Paris pulled off the single most audacious con in recorded history. He didn't rob a bank. He didn't forge a painting. No, he sold the Eiffel Tower for scrap metal to a group of successful, intelligent, Paris-based businessmen who handed over the equivalent of hundreds of thousands of dollars. Now here's the part I need you to sit with before we go any further. The thing that made this work wasn't stupidity. It wasn't desperation. No, the men who fell for this were sharp, successful dealers established in their industry. What got them wasn't a gap in their intelligence at all. It was a gap in something else, something that's a lot harder to defend against. And by the end of this video, you're going to know exactly what that gap was. Because the same mechanism that emptied Andre Poisson's bank account in 1925, the guy who got scammed, is still running today on people just like him, maybe even on you. I'm Johnny Diggs. Let's dig into this. So, before we get to the tower, I need you to understand something about Victor Lustig, because most con artists work by finding the dumbest person in the room. Lustig, he didn't do that. He found the sharpest person and beat them anyway. And unless you understand how he did that, the rest of this story is just a fun anecdote instead of the warning it actually is. Lustig was born in 1890 in what's now the Czech Republic. By the time he was 20, he spoke 5 languages: French, German, English, Czech, Italian, all fluently, all without an accent. Not textbook fluent, fit into the room type of fluent. For years, he worked the Atlantic Ocean liners, first-class cabins, wealthy passengers, long crossings. He'd run card games, fake investment offers, low-stakes charm plays, small money, good practice. But what he was really building across those years on the water was a blueprint, not for any single con, for how people decide to trust someone. He studied it the way a surgeon studies anatomy. What made a mark relax? What made them lean in? What made them stop asking questions? By 1925, he had logged more hours observing human trust than almost anyone alive. And then, one morning, he picked up a Paris newspaper and he saw an article about the Eiffel Tower. It was in pretty rough shape. Built as a temporary structure for the 1889 World's Fair, 36 years past its planned demolition date, maintenance costs were climbing and politicians were openly asking, should we just tear it down? Lustig, he read that article. He didn't see a building in disrepair. He saw an opening. See, here's what I want you to pay attention to in this next part. Because the actual pitch, what Lustig said, was almost secondary. The reason this worked had nothing to do with how smoothly he delivered his lines. It was about what he built before he said anything at all. And if you miss this, you basically miss the whole lesson. You see, step 1 was the stationery. Lustig forged official documents from the Ministry of Posts and Telegraphs, the actual French government department responsible for the Eiffel Tower, not a vague Ministry of Infrastructure. The right department. He looked it up. He got the typography right. He got the seal right. He got it all right. Most people seeing official stationery don't verify it. They just feel it. The weight of the paper does the work. And Lustig, he got that right. Now step 2 was the venue. Lustig booked a private meeting room at the Hôtel de Crillon, one of the most prestigious addresses in Paris. Heads of state stay at the Crillon. You don't hold a scam at the Crillon, which is exactly why Lustig chose it, exactly why he thought it would work. Now step 3 was the list that he made. He identified the 6 biggest scrap metal dealers in Paris and sent each of them a personal letter on that ministry's stationery, inviting them to a confidential government briefing. The framing was deliberate. You specifically have been selected. This is sensitive. Come alone. Tell no one. And then, step 4. He took them on a private tour of the Eiffel Tower itself. Official cars, a private guide, the whole production, making everything seem as legitimate, as falsely as it was. So, at the meeting, he laid it out. The tower's upkeep had become unsustainable. The government had made the painful decision to dismantle it and sell the iron as scrap. The contract, it was worth millions, and the 6 of them were the finalists. The secrecy, he explained, was essential. The French public was emotionally attached to the tower. There would be protests if word got out. The government, well, they needed to move quietly. Now, here's the thing I need you to notice. At no point had Lustig said anything verifiably false. He hadn't claimed the deal was done. He hadn't signed a contract. He hadn't promised delivery. The hotel said, this is official. The stationery he got said, hey, this is the government. The tour said, this is real. The secrecy said, hey, you guys are one of 6. You better act fast. He let the entire situation do the lying. He just stood in the middle of it, looking important. And here's the final layer, the one that sealed it. He told the dealers the bids would be reviewed privately. He'd be in touch. And then he watched to see who was most desperate to win. 6 smart men. One of them was about to make a very expensive mistake. Actually, before I tell you who it was and why he was the perfect mark, if you're watching this channel for the first time, go ahead and please hit subscribe. Our channel and our team really appreciate that. Every episode, I dig up a new file, a con, a scheme, a fraud, and pull it apart until you understand not just what happened, but why it worked. That's the part most people skip. Yeah, we don't skip that here. So, anyway, out of the 6 dealers, one man rose to the top of Lustig's list. His name was Andre Poisson. And the reason he was the perfect mark isn't what you'd actually expect. He wasn't the most naive. He wasn't the most greedy. In fact, out of everyone in that room, Andre Poisson was the one who almost didn't even fall for it. Understanding why he did anyway, though, is the most important part of this whole story. Andre was a successful businessman, but he was new to Paris's upper circles, hungry to prove he belonged, to land the kind of deal that would cement his reputation. That ambition was what made him valuable to Lustig, not stupidity, but motivation. But you know what? Here's where it gets really interesting. Andre's wife wasn't convinced. She pulled her husband aside after the first meeting. Something felt off about this deputy director general, she said. Why was he so eager? Why the secrecy? Why them specifically? To his credit, Andre went back to Lustig and pushed, asked harder questions, demanded more documentation. A lesser con man panics here, over-explains, gets defensive, starts plugging holes, and accidentally creates new ones. Lustig, he did none of that. He leaned back in his chair, paused, and then quietly, almost reluctantly, leaned forward. He told Andre that yes, there was a reason something felt slightly off. He was, after all, a government official. The salary wasn't what it should be, and on a deal of this size, it would be helpful if the winning bidder understood how things actually worked in Paris. He was asking for a bribe. Andre's suspicion didn't just ease, it evaporated, because now he understood. This wasn't a scam, this was just France, a bureaucrat on the take. Andre had navigated this before. He recognized this. It was the most real, most human thing that had happened across both meetings. So, he paid the contract price. He paid the bribe. He went home and told his wife that they had just purchased the Eiffel Tower. Victor Lustig picked up a briefcase full of cash, walked out of the Hotel de Crillon, and boarded a train to Vienna. When Andre figured out he'd been robbed, and it didn't take long, he faced a choice. Either go to the police or stay quiet. The choice he made, though, and why he made it, tells you more about how cons actually function than anything Victor Lustig did. Because the con wasn't even finished when Andre handed over the money. It was only finished when Andre decided to say nothing. Think about what going to the police would have required. Andre would have had to walk into a Paris precinct and explain that he had attempted to bribe a government official in exchange for a secret contract to purchase and demolish the Eiffel Tower. Every major paper in France would have had that story within 24 hours. His business partners, his social circle, his wife's family, every person who had ever taken him seriously, reading about how Andre Poisson had tried to buy the Eiffel Tower. No, he stayed quiet. And this, you see, this is the part that doesn't get talked about enough. The bribe wasn't just a manipulation tactic that lowered Andre's guard. It was a lock. By accepting the bribe, by becoming a participant in the corruption rather than just a buyer, Andre made himself legally and socially unable to report the crime without implicating himself. You see, Lustig didn't just con him. He constructed a situation where the victim had no viable move after the fact. Every piece of this con had a second function. The hotel wasn't just a venue. It manufactured legitimacy. The secrecy, it wasn't just cover. It manufactured urgency. And the bribe, it wasn't just a manipulation. It was insurance. Every single layer served two purposes. Victor Lustig had just escaped completely clean. No charges, no pursuit, no trail. So what does the world's most careful con man do with a clean escape? He goes back. Because here's what you have to understand about people like Lustig. This wasn't about money. Not really. The money was how you kept score. The actual game was the architecture, the construction, the craft, and a man obsessed with craft cannot stop himself from running it again. 2 months after vanishing to Vienna, Lustig returned to Paris with fresh stationery, a fresh list of dealers, and the same exact pitch. New marks, same tower. But this time, the victim did go to the police. Lustig was already on a boat to the United States before the report was filed. For the next decade, he ran cons across America. Banks, investment schemes, wealthy widows. He was so good and so careful that the law couldn't even touch him. But the story I can't leave out, because it might be my favorite thing that has ever happened, is Al Capone. Lustig approached Capone with a stock investment proposal, asked for $50,000. Capone, not a man who handed money to strangers and got it back, gave it to him. Lustig held the money for 2 months, then returned every dollar, told Capone the deal had fallen through, he hadn't been comfortable risking Capone's money on a deal he wasn't too certain about, and so Capone stared at him. Nobody gave Capone his money back. He was so impressed that when Lustig quietly mentioned he was a bit short on cash himself, could Capone spare $5,000 as a small consolation? Capone reached into his coat and handed it right over. You see, Victor Lustig grifted Al Capone for $5,000 and walked out of the room. Someone this careful, this patient, this architecturally precise, how do you even catch him? You don't. Mostly. For years at least, you don't. But every system has a weak point, and Lustig's weak point was the one thing he couldn't architect around, the people that knew him personally. By the early 1930s, Lustig had moved into counterfeiting, manufacturing fake U.S. currency at the industrial scale. The Secret Service had been hunting him for years. Tips, near misses, always just one step behind. But in 1935, his mistress, angry after a fight, walked into a federal building and told them exactly where to find him. Even then, in federal custody, he escaped, climbed out of the Manhattan Federal Detention Center on a rope of bedsheets, walked calmly down the street pretending to wash windows while the entire FBI searched for him. They recaptured him, though, 12 days later. 20 years in Alcatraz. Prisoner number 523. Lustig died in 1947 of pneumonia at the Springfield Medical Center for Federal Prisoners. On his intake paperwork, when they asked his occupation, he wrote, apprentice salesman. Every time I close a file, I ask the same question. Why did it work? Because Lustig wasn't selling something invisible. He was standing in front of the most recognizable landmark in the world, in the city where it lived, to people who saw it every day. And they bought it. What he actually sold them was a feeling. The hotel created legitimacy. The stationery created authority. The secrecy created exclusivity. The 6-man list created competition. And the bribe, it created familiarity. It turned a too-good-to-be-true situation into something that felt like the real messy, recognizable world that we all live in. He didn't make them believe something false. He found something they already wanted to believe, and he wrapped it in enough texture that believing it felt like the sensible thing to do. And that's the thing nobody wants to say out loud about cons. The victim is never really just a victim. Andre Poisson wanted this deal to be real. His ambition wanted it, his ego wanted it, and Lustig didn't create that desire, he just found it and handed it back to him in a convincing envelope. The con was never actually the Eiffel Tower. The con was Andre's ambition, and that's why cons like this still work today. Lustig built his entire con on one thing. If you make the situation look real, people will fill in the gaps themselves. And here's what's wild. That exact principle, manufacture the environment, let the mark convince themselves, was used 50 years earlier by a man who didn't just fake a building. He faked an entire country with a flag, a capital city, a national bank, and an official language. He convinced British families to emigrate there, invest their savings there, and build their futures there. The country, though, it never existed. Next week, you'll know exactly how Gregor McGregor built a fictional nation called Poyes, and why the victims ended up defending him even after they found out the country wasn't real. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm Johnny Diggs. Let's keep digging.